Hey everybody, CVH here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the newest Item Sorcerer deck I played on the stream, and actually took to a 9-2 Gauntlet mode finish on today's stream, as a matter of fact. Now, longtime viewers of the channel will know that I love item decks. I think they are some of the coolest combo-oriented decks in the Elder Scrolls Legends, and some of the best as well. I've featured a number of item decks already on the channel. Item Sorcerer, it's been a while since I visited that one, but I had some Item Assassin, some Item Battle Mage, but the last time I featured one of these was more than a month ago. My opinions have changed on a couple cards. I've seen some pretty cool, very combo-heavy versions of these decks around the ladder, around the Gauntlet modes, and I decided to put my own spin on the new version of this deck. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about each individual card specifically, how they interact, how they work together, the combos you can pull off, and how the deck just wins games. And I'll even be including a couple clips of the gameplay from the Gauntlet run with this deck at the end of the video if you guys want to check that out. I'm not going to have any actual audio talking about my plays because I was playing music due to copyright and stuff like that, but if you guys want to see some really crazy plays to end the game, definitely check out those highlights. But in this video, I'm going to be focusing more on explaining how the deck actually works. Let's get into the card choices. Now, I'd usually like to start at the bottom of the curve and work my way up, but I think in order to really get an idea of how the deck operates, if you're completely new to the game, I need to talk about the Master of Arms and the Gardener of Swords first. Master of Arms from the core set, someone equips the two highest cost items from your discard pile. If there's a three-way tie or something, it will just pick randomly at that point. But Master of Arms, namely getting back the Tome of Alterations, Maces of Encumbrances, and since we're also playing the Dragon Priest Masks, if we're able to put this in the discard pile, it'll give basically give the Master of Arms +2/+2 and give it an additional item proc. So you can really get the Master of Arms to some really insane stats relatively quickly later in the game once you've played a lot of items or milled some of the items. Ideally, you don't really want to be equipping the Dragon Priest Mask from your hand. You can use cards like Merchant's Camel and Palace Conspirator to get them in the discard pile. And then we have the Gardener of Swords from the Madhouse collection. If you want to play this deck, you absolutely need Gardener of Swords. It is not a replaceable card. I like to say that Madhouse, I did a video on Madhouse collection, and where I mentioned that Madhouse collection is a good, worth your while expansion, but not necessarily something you need to focus on if you're a new player to get first. If you really want to play item decks, get Madhouse Collection. You really need to get Madhouse Collection if you want to play very specific styles of decks that I did mention in that video. For example, the item decks with Gardener, Orc decks with Stone Shard Orc, etc. Just kind of a staple card in the archetype, copying all the items. It doesn't copy the buffs. For example, if a card like Master Swordsmith makes an item have additional power, the copy that the Gardener of Swords gets won't get that buff, but Gardener of Swords will copy the summon effect of items, so a double tome will let you draw twice. So those are the main combo centerpieces of this deck. So let's go into some support cards starting at the bottom again. Firebolt, just a good efficient removal. This deck can potentially have a hard time getting off the ground with its crazier combos, so it's important to not die on the board too early to an aggro deck. Enchanted Plate, another one of our staple items in this version. You can play this deck not in Sorcerer. I've played other versions of it as you've seen on the channel. The Assassin version with this, all the rest of the combo pieces is very popular because it uses Embassy Disguise instead of Enchanted Plate. I personally think Enchanted Plate is way stronger than Embassy Disguise most of the time you're going to be playing it, especially in the very early turns when you're just fighting for the board. You can give something cover, but generally the +3 health is going to help you trade a lot better. It's going to let things stick on the board longer versus removal actions, etc. So I definitely like the plates myself. And you also get to play Hiking Emmerich, which I don't really need to discuss much. It's just a really crazy card, and we do have some wards in the deck. Not as much as a mid-range Sorcerer, though. Palace Conspirator, we are a combo deck, which means draw power is welcome, and it's not the absolute best draw card, but I think this card is very important in the versions of the deck that want to play Dragon Priest Mask, because like I mentioned, getting stuck with this card in your hand is usually not ideal. It's usually way better in your discard pile. So Palace Conspirator, if you draw the Dragon Priest Mask early, can help you just dump it and find a different card in its place, and again, it's another cheap body that can help fight for the board early. Harpy needs no introduction, amazing card to help you stabilize, Swingy Prophecy, etc. Skilled Blacksmith, again, doesn't really need much introduction, amazing card if this many cards in our deck are items. Wardcrafter, another real staple blue 2-drop just like the Shrieking Harpy, and of course, with the added benefit of keeping our important early game cards like the Skilled Blacksmith and the Master Swordsmith alive for a bit longer. Daggerfall Mage, again, an amazing card, which I don't think is very replaceable in this deck. I would rather play without Daggerfalls than without Gardener of Swords, but that is in no means to say that Daggerfall Mage isn't amazing in this deck, because a lot of this deck's consistency relies heavily on your ability to get those card options early. So Daggerfall Mage, amazing card to see in your opening hand. You definitely want to keep it as much as possible. Trades early, helps you fight for the board because of its ward, and the extra Tome of Alterations are really going to come in handy when you start looking for those big combos combo turns. So here's a combo card that I wasn't playing in item versions before, and that is Dark Rebirth, sacrificing a creature to summon a copy of it. Now your main target for Dark Rebirth, although you can use it on other cards in a pinch, is going to be the Master of Arms that we talked about, because it's going to be dumping those items in the discard pile again, and giving you another copy of the Master of Arms to reuse all those summon effects. Amazing if to just give you a 3 magicka proc basically on an additional Master of Arms to function as an additional copy when you have another Gardener of Swords up to copy everything. It can be pretty insane. I have seen versions go even deeper into the strategy and play not only the 3 copies of Dark Rebirth, but also a Knight to Remember, which can also duplicate Master of Arms in a pinch. It shackles it, but you're still getting all those items over and over again. Now, I'm a little bit less heavy on those kinds of combos in this version, and that is to make room for the Master Swordsmith I'll be talking about in a minute. So the Gardener we already talked about. Mace, just an amazing item. We're shackling things, of course. This is one of your main ways to stabilize against aggro. Just being able to use that many shackle effects over and over makes it really good. Also, we're not playing Dress Tormentor, even though we use so many copies of Mace in an average game with this deck. And with the Shrieking Harpies, that's just one more inconsistent combo piece. And as we'll talk about with the Glass Helms, you don't really need it against aggro. But Master Swordsmith. So I'm playing the Master Swordsmith version. A lot of people don't include this card. I, for one, personally very much prefer the version with Master Swordsmith. But here's the reason why it's a little bit strange. Like I mentioned, a lot of your powerful turns come from the discard pile. A lot of items have already been played. You've ideally milled a Dragon Priest Mask or two. You get those crazy Master of Arms Gardener of Swords. When an item hits the discard pile, like when it's equipped with Gardener of Swords, when it's in the discard pile, it does not retain the buff. So if you buff a lot of items and then mill them away to the discard pile, when you get them back, they're just going to be their normal stats. However, when you stick a Master Swordsmith early, that enables you, because most of the items in the deck, you're going to be playing from your hand to the board before they hit the discard pile. So if you can stick a Master Swordsmith for a few turns, just the sheer nature of like a 2/5 enchanted plate, as soon as you get like 1 or 2 procs off the Master Swordsmith, your deck gets very, very scary, even if you wind up reusing them at lowered stats later in the game. That's enough to help you fight for the board, and if they just completely don't respect this card, if they just never come up with an answer, Master Swordsmith is one of those kind of snowball-y cards that can just win you the game by itself. A lot of snowball-y cards like Goblin Skulk or Daring Cutpurse, they basically snowball in the way that they take over the board immediately. Master Swordsmith is more of an investment. It's more of a sketchy card given the graveyard discard pile interactions, but if it's able to stick for multiple turns, it can be absolutely fantastic. Late in the game, it's definitely a bit worse, but one of your most powerful early game plays, something your opponent definitely has to respect, and it gives some viability to items that might not be good in all matchups, like the Glass Helm of Remedies. So I should mention Arcane Enchanter, because in my earlier versions of this deck, after Heroes of Skyrim, I was playing this card primarily to just try to get drain on things. That was a bad idea. I don't recommend playing Arcane Enchanter. It's too slow and it's too inconsistent. Glass Helm of Remedy makes a whole lot more sense if we're playing Master Swordsmith as well, because of course this card can actually get stats. I did wind up equipping a 9 attack Glass Helm of Remedy sometime during the Gauntlet run. It was pretty insane. My opponent didn't have an answer for multiple Master Swordsmiths for multiple turns, as you might expect. Coupled with the increased ways we can proc our items in this version with the Dragon Priest Masks and the Dark Rebirths, and even milling those items before we even have to play them from hand with the Conspirators and the Merchant's Camels, this card can heal you for a ton. I guess you might see some of that in the highlighted clips, but just the 2 copies of it with the amount of cycle and the amount of mill in this deck, and also sometimes when you overdraw cards, if your hand just gets too big in some of those combo turns, not even always a bad thing because you can just get them back with the Master of Arms. But Glass Helm of Remedy, one of the most powerful healing options, and when you think about it, if you just have 1 copy of Gardener's Swords on the board, you can go Gardener, Glass Helm on something else, that's a heal for 8. That's a huge amount of life to be gaining against a lot of the aggro and token decks out there. And if you wind up reusing it over and over and getting a Master of Arms to bring them back with a couple Gardeners or something, like no aggro deck can realistically close the window after you've healed for that much. So I definitely recommend playing the 2 copies of the Glass Helm of Remedy. 3 copies of Lightning Bolt. Now that's a staple, don't mean to talk about that at all. Merchant's Camel, we could even play 3 of these. We are a combo deck that's trying to search for our combo pieces as well as ideally mill Dragon Priest Masks, so it makes a lot of sense. Just kind of a weak body for the amount of magic you're spending, which is why I'm not maxing it out compared to the 3 copies of Palace Conspirator. Tome, already talked about it, one of the most powerful draw engines in the deck alongside the Enchanted Plate, really helps us cycle. Important card to see early on against control and ramp decks for sure. Dragon Priest Mask, giving us those extra item procs. You'll see some of the crazy things these items can do in the highlighted videos, or in the highlighted clips in the video. But Dragon Priest Mask, I sort of underrated it. If we're going to be playing this card though, I do think it's worth playing the Palace Conspirators and Merchant's Camel, because this card is sometimes horrendous by itself unless you've already stuck Master of Arms to the board. If Master of Arms comes down with it in the discard pile, it's great. If this card's in your hand and Master of Arms lives for a turn, it's generally pretty great. But outside of that, not a card you'd want to see by itself too often. Emmerich, just an amazing staple in Sorcerer. You'd play it in every single Sorcerer deck you possibly can, which is all of them. And Journey to Sovngarde, so potentially the most interesting and or wacky card, saved for last. I should preface this by saying I'm not exactly sure if this deck, or if this card is needed in this deck. The idea behind it is that you cycle through so much of your deck and you use Master of Arms and Gardener of Swords so thoroughly that you might actually run out of copies of them against some of the slower matchups. Against an aggro deck, you typically end the game once you get a couple good Glass Helm of Remedies off and then just swing with a bunch of stuff and maces attached to them so they can't counter push. But against one of those slower decks, you might need additional combo potential, and if you've gone through 30 or so cards in your deck, you've used most of your Gardeners and Master of Arms, playing Journey to Sovngarde, unless you're in a pretty bad position on board already, which hopefully you won't be, playing the Journey will probably just win you the game on the spot, especially with how much more card draw is likely available to you. You can start getting those insane statted creatures out there. I found that to be necessary not too often, but luckily, if it's a dead card, you can potentially mill it in some matchups with the Palace Conspirators, so it shouldn't get in the way too much. It is just one pretty greedy card of a deck that does have a lot of cycle, so I don't think it's that bad to include it. Definitely needs more testing, but definitely not a card you should completely write off. So before we get into some of the crazy in-game clips from the Gauntlet run earlier today, I should mention that this deck is still a work in progress. This is just my version of it, and while it's going to look like it's going to be absolutely insane in some of these highlights, I should warn you that it is somewhat inconsistent. It did go 9-2. It's definitely capable of having a solid grind on the ladder, but the reason I love this deck and decks like it so much are the crazy combo potential and how interesting and fun they are to play and try to find the correct lines. You can really analyze turns to no end. In the late game, once you're getting in those crazy good positions on board, so you're not about to die or anything, your biggest weakness probably is the turn timer, but up to that point, the deck does have a bit of consistency problems. There are a lot of cards that you need to find in the right order, so I'm not trying to show off this deck and tell you guys it's tier 1 or tier 0. I could probably show you some of these clips, and in a vacuum you'd think that it's insane if you just stumble upon the deck for the first time, but it does take some knowledge of knowing how to play it, and it does, you know, like most combo decks, have some consistency problems despite the amount of card draw it has. But hopefully you've enjoyed this rundown of it, and hopefully you enjoy some of the crazy things it can do in these highlighted videos. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, stay subscribed to the channel for more Legends content every day. Check out my stream in the description to maybe catch some of these games live. I'll see you guys next time.